Hello and welcome to Seen and Heard, a podcast about abuse on Heart Over Ego Radio. This is an exploration of domestic violence through raw, unfiltered, and important conversations about the realities of domestic violence, its effects, the survival tactics, the work being done all over the world to end abuse, and more. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. 1 in 4 women are victims of severe domestic violence by their intimate partners. Only 34% of domestic violence abuse victims are treated for injuries sustained during their domestic violence. Nationwide domestic violence hotlines report an average of 20,000 calls per day. Domestic violence is real. It's happening in our communities, and it's happening to our friends. It's happening to our families. Myself, Mandee Elam, Vanessa Hill, and Lexi Duquette are childhood friends from Vermont. Life took us all on very different journeys. However, each of us have experienced some form of abuse, and we chose to come together to foster a conversation around healing it. Welcome, Vanessa. How are you?
Hi. I'm so happy to be here. This is so exciting. It's our first episode.
Our first episode. Welcome, Lexi. How are you?
Good. Thank you, girls. I'm so excited to do this.
We've been talking about this project for a little while, and it's just the perfect place to host this discussion here on Heart Over Ego Radio. If you're a new listener, we invite you to check out Heart Over Ego Radio on Facebook, Instagram, on any major podcast app. All you have to do is search and download Heart Over Ego Radio, and you will have access to our shows. We have about 7 live shows a week and more that are uploaded each day. And we encourage you to like us, follow us, and let us know what it is you're interested in hearing or learning about. So we're really excited for this show because domestic violence is really real and it's just not going away. And when Vanessa, Lexi, and I held space, we came to realize that, we've all been through it ourselves and it keeps happening more and more. So we wanted to bring more awareness. I was hoping, ladies, you guys, we could start with sharing our stories a little bit.
Yeah.
Do it.
Let's do it. Vanessa, would you like to share first?
Sure. So I was in an abusive relationship a few years ago with my daughter's father. And to some extent, I still deal with abuse because he's still in my life because we have a kid together. But I was really kind of shocked at how little conversation there is around domestic abuse situations and how intimidating it was to be a person in the world who went through something like that and was healing from something like that, and just like how taboo it seemed to be in my community.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, it is super common. I feel like every woman knows several women who have gone through this at some point in their life. And I think it's really time to start normalizing it. And there are a lot of groups and organizations that are working for that. But having a really consistent, open, honest conversation about what it's like to, whether you're in an abusive situation or you've been out of it for years and everything in between, it's really important. So I'm really honored and really happy to be doing this project with both of you and, all the women and men we're going to talk to in the future about their experiences.
Absolutely. Lexi, what would you like to share?
Oh, thank you so much for sharing, Vanessa. So I experienced a horrible relationship years ago, young, dumb, out of high school, got myself into a situation that was so scary, and I never thought I was going to make it out alive. But I did make it out alive. And my struggles just trying to get out of that relationship and then navigate healing through that period, and the fear and everything, the trauma that I was left with and still have to deal with, there's a stigma around talking about it. There's a stigma around, speaking out. And just what I went through was horrific. And I know I'm not alone. I know there's other people going through it. And my biggest thing is I want people to know that you can get through it. And so if we can just help one person, I will feel like, something good has come from something so horrible. So I look forward to hearing and making this connection with so many people. So thank you, girls.
Thank you. I'm pumped
so
because,
Mandee,
like you both said, this is something that is so common. It's incredibly common, and it's happening all the time. I, for work, am an intuitive empowerment guide, and I've worked within different types of counseling for a long time, and I did lots of social work. And I can't tell you how many of my own friends constantly tell me these types of abuse that they deal with, how many of my clients, how many random coworkers or people I've known or just talked to. It's just become something that's so normal. Yet we know that abuse exists, but we're not very good on like calling it out or changing it. For me, I went through right out of college a experience, it was where I met a guy, totally fell for him, thought he was great, and didn't realize that I had a lot of different like psychological and emotional abuse going on with him. And he was leading a totally double life. We ended up moving in and getting an apartment together, and several months after we had lived together, I found out that he had cheated on me with like over 100 women he met on Craigslist, like every day, when he was saying he was working late or different things that I totally fell for and didn't know. And like there were all these warning signs that I missed because I was naive and I wanted to believe in the best and I wanted to show up for my relationship. And so, there's lots more trauma and drama with that whole story. That's the short version, but it's something that I've certainly experienced in lots of different ways, and I know many of my friends and family members have. So I'm ready to foster healing, and I think if we just bring it out of the shadows a little bit, if we let some of our stories be seen and heard, if we let some of these statistics be seen and heard, if we talk about ways to heal and change, because that's the other thing. We're all the sinner and the saint. Every single one of us has been abused and the abuser. It goes hand in hand often. And so it's really important that we get really raw and real about how it is we tackle this problem.
Absolutely.
I couldn't agree more.
So let's get in. Maybe we should share our stories a little deeper. Vanessa, do you want to share a little bit more about what happened with you?
Sure.
And how you ended up getting into the situation you were into?
Sure. So my daughter's father, before we had my daughter, we were friends for over a decade. And he was married before we were together, and I actually know his ex-wife. And we started dating when he was separated, and the abuse started probably like 6 weeks into our relationship, with like this crazy blowout fight that just totally blindsided me and came out of nowhere, and it was really scary and violent, and I was pregnant at the time, but I didn't know that I was pregnant. So from that point on, throughout my pregnancy, the violence escalated. Like I should have gone to the hospital several times, but just kind of like healed myself, so to speak, in private. And my life was just being systematically dismantled by him. He was cheating on me also, which was, I found out about, there were a few different women he was seeing behind my back, which was like incredibly traumatic for me. And I was pregnant, obviously. So it was even worse, like going through the hormonal things that come with pregnancy and then dealing with an unfaithful partner. He was stealing money from me. He was buying drugs with my money. He was verbally, mentally abusing me every day. And when my daughter was about 5 months old was when I finally got him arrested for domestic violence, for attacking me. I had to be very strategic about it because I didn't want him to be able to have of my daughter. he was on her birth certificate. So even though we weren't married. So in the state of Maine, where we lived at the time, you don't have to put, if you're unmarried, you don't have to put the father of your child on your child's birth certificate. It's, I don't know, I think it works differently in states. I know Maine is a little different, so which is what I should have done. And then they have to prove their paternity. But we were in a relationship, and he was really pressuring me to make sure that he was on her birth certificate. So if I had, just kicked him out of my apartment, he would have had custody of her also. Like, he could have taken her, and I would have had to, find him with her. So I was really strategic, and I waited until there was a bad enough attack on me that I could call the police and have him arrested. And I really actually kind of planned it out, which sounds really messed up. But
to me, it doesn't, because as someone who has witnessed this, people can be really cyclical. And when you deal with an abuser, I'm sure a lot of people listening are like, actually, that doesn't sound weird, because you tend to know the cycles.
Yeah. And you know what? Having gone through that myself, there's times where you call and there's nothing they can do. Mm-hmm. And then you're left there to reap the god awful, what they then, pay you back for calling on them. So you have to be strategic, unfortunately, because not everything is covered.
Yeah. And I mean, I didn't antagonize him or anything, or set anything up. I just waited. I mean, at that point the attacks were coming almost every day on me, but this was the perfect opportunity. And I called 911, and it was the scariest night of my life. Actually having 6 police officers come into my apartment. They were all incredibly kind and wonderful, and they believed me and didn't believe him, and he was arrested. And I got him out of my apartment because he wouldn't leave prior to that. So that was a huge relief. And then that's when the legal process of him being prosecuted by the state of Maine for violence against me and going through parental rights and responsibilities and how we were going to handle custody, that whole process started. So it's still ongoing. So my daughter's going to be 4 in a few months. So.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that with us. I do have a follow-up question. After he was arrested, then what happened? Was he released? Was there a restraining order? Was there more fear involved after that?
So I was granted, a victim's advocate called me. This happened at 11 at night. So the next morning, I was given a number by the police officers. And I think a victim's advocate from the police station in Portland, where I lived at the time, called me. And I had to go down to the police station, write out my whole statement, give my whole story, but I was granted a protection order right away. And he was he didn't have anyone to bail him out of jail. So he sat in jail for a little while, but then he was released. But yeah, I had a protection order right away because your testimony, something I learned, your testimony is evidence in assault cases. The whole he said, she said thing doesn't always hold up. Judges actually do take into consideration your story, even if it happened with no witnesses, which was wonderful. Because, victims of abuse always have to face the reality of not being believed. Mm-hmm. I've gone through that myself. Lexi, I'm sure you've gone through that with your situation.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
yeah.
Totally.
So he was only given one supervised visit with my daughter after that point. And that's how that unfolded. So it worked out well for me. But it doesn't always shake out like that.
It doesn't always, and I've worked with a lot of survivors of abuse who have gotten strong enough to call the police, and then either the police don't believe them or their abuser is released right away and there's no sort of restraint against them coming back towards them. So you were really served and treated well, and that you had an advocate reach out. That's pretty awesome.
I didn't have anything like that. I didn't have an advocate reach out or anything. I felt so lost and confused, and did not have that type of support. So I hear you about having the advocate. I remember them being like, "You need to sign this. This is the only way we can help you if you sign this."
Well, I think that's a perfect little bit, Lexi, because you do have the other side of that, and this is something that we're continuing to heal as a collective for all of our listeners out there. Each year, hopefully we're getting a little bit better and better at helping to give people support and resources. But it is not easy, and there are a lot of holes in all of the systems. And so, Lexi, you're going to be able to share a lot more light on that for us.
Well, Lexi, also your abuser, he wasn't arrested, right?
No, he did get arrested.
Oh, he did.
He got arrested a couple times. He was in and out getting arrested. There was a couple times that no, he did not. And those were the worst. They were absolutely the worst. Or when he would get, when he would finally get let out, because nobody would bail him out, and that would make him even angrier because his family would just not support him. And then he would come after me 10 times harder. And even though there was a restraining order, it really didn't mean anything. It gave me more fear. That restraining order only enraged him that much more. And there was nothing that they could do, because from the time he would show up to the time a police officer would actually show up, even though the restraining order was there and he was breaking, he didn't care. You know what I mean? He didn't care if that meant he was going back to jail. He just was after me.
Those restraining orders don't, sometimes they're just completely worthless. Mine,
I was in Florida.
I know. I'm also wondering if you were just in a worse kind, and it was it was 10 years ago?
This was over, we're going on 2006, 2007. So it was in Florida too, and I'm not 100%. I was young, so I didn't know the laws. I didn't know much. All I remember is I was in beauty school down there, and I lived with my grandfather, and I remember hearing in class, one of the girls, the local girls, her sister, went missing and then found in her abuser's closet, taped and abused and beaten and killed. And she had already had a restraining order on him. So that was what I had in my mind, and my fear was a restraining order. And I at one point ended up going back and lifting it. And I think I was so young and dumb that I was irritating the police, because I came back and I was like, I want to get rid of the restraining order, because it just set him on me 10 times harder, And he would get out. It was awful. He'd get released and come after me.
Which, technically, they're supposed to throw him back in jail. With mine, it was if he even texted me something aggressive, or that wasn't specifically about our daughter, I could call the police and have them, he would be arrested. But I was in a similar situation as you, where I would report him for technically violating the protection order, and they would be like, yeah, I don't know, it's just you're it's kind of 50-50. I had a female police officer victim shame me so badly one time, and the victim's advocate that was in the room was livid. So there's just, those protection orders are great, but they don't always function.
Will you share a little bit more about that experience?
Oh, when the police officer that shamed me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this was a couple months after the protection order was granted. My mom she would come to Portland all the time to help me take care of my daughter. And one of her visits was falling on one of, I feel like I should give him like a name, like not his real name, but
you are good at that. You give him one, girl.
Okay, let's call him Kyle, which is not his name. We'll call him. Is that okay? Because it's like, or should I pick something else?
It's perfect. Continue with Kyle. Go.
Let's call him Kyle. Okay, so Kyle, one of his weekly visits, excuse me, was falling on a day that I was going to be working and my mom was going to be taking care of my daughter. So I texted him to say, listen, my mom, who at the time he like hated her because she stood up to him and couldn't stand him. My mom is going to be the one like dropping her off to you and picking her up with it was always like a person that I trusted that was going to be supervising the visit. So he flipped out and he texted me that he was going to be reporting me to Child Protection Services because he had evidence or like had a feeling that my mom and I was neglecting Lola, my daughter, that's her name, like neglecting her and just like dumping her with my mom 24/7, which is ridiculous because she lived in another state and would come like twice a month. So I brought my text messages to the police station and I was like, he's threatening to call, DHHS on me and it's really stressing me out. And how is this not harassment, And this female police officer came in and I was like, oh God, it's like a woman. Like she's going to be like, yes, like I get this. Like she's going to be more sympathetic. And she read my text messages and she was just like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, you're kind of like starting it with him, like the argument. And I was like, I'm standing up for myself.
Oh boy.
I have he beat me up for a year and a half. I'm like finally able to be like, don't talk to me like this, And she just sent me on my way. There was nothing. And he was like really threatening to like upend my wellness and like my life. Several text messages. So yeah, I think she got reported actually, the officer. She ended up getting reported.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See,
so,
I feel like there's that.
Yeah. Well, there's another experience in this whole thing.
Yeah, but people who, play a role and have the chance to support somebody. Now, that's such an awful position to be in. You know what I mean? As is. But, like, as a police officer, it's their duty to protect. And, but when it's an innocent bystander, the watching and not doing anything or acting on or supporting. Like, that's another thing I want to bring up at some point. Like, when you witness abuse as an outsider, as a bystander, like, that whole role.
Yeah, what do you do about it?
Yeah, because I remember literally we were in the car once and we were at a light and my abuser was literally bashing my head into the dashboard because he was mad and like beating me in the car as he was driving. Literally, I looked over just looking like, that desperate feeling of somebody help me.
Yeah.
And the people in the car next to me were all laughing. Do you want to talk about one of the most degrading moments? And I was just praying somebody was going to see and call and like report, call in our car, our license plate or follow us or do something, the whole time. That's all I am praying to myself. And I look over and I'm getting laughed at. And then I'm looking at, another car. They're like desperately trying to avoid seeing it. And I was just like trying to like mouth, like, somebody help me, somebody just,
Well, the people,
that was the worst experience ever.
The people did you see the people that were laughing at you? Were they like,
oh yeah, it was a car full of like teenagers.
Yeah.
Maybe older than teenagers,
Teenagers are really fucking stupid.
And then there was like a lady and a husband who, their face was like, you saw them gasp.
And
then you saw them shield and look away.
There's so much avoidance because nobody wants to get involved. Like,
I know.
It's bullshit. Also, is it
like
that I'm swearing? Did we decide that we're going to swear on this podcast?
Mandee.
Oh, here we are.
Are you there?
I don't know what happened there. Well, second here, and play a little commercial. You are listening to Seen and Heard on Heart Over Ego.
Mandee, we need to know for
I'll leave you with a little commercial, and we'll be right back.
You are listening to Heart Over Ego Radio, a network of shows offering healing and guidance for your beautiful journey. Tune in on Mondays for the Alchemy Sisters, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 Eastern. Tuesdays, tune in and tune up. Body Awareness and Self-Care, 11 Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. Wednesdays, One for All is Love, 1:30 Pacific, 4:30 p.m. Eastern. Thursdays, Unbound with Cynthia Martin, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 Eastern. Fridays, The Witching Hour with Green Witch Village and the Alchemy Sisters, 11 Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. And on Fridays, Rain Radio, 10 Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. Saturdays, Creating Heaven on Earth, 11 Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. And Sundays, Everyday Psychic Radio at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. This is the Heart Over Ego Radio Network.
Welcome back to Seen and Heard, a podcast about abuse. You are here with me, Mandee, Vanessa, and Lexi.
Hi.
So in this next part of our show, I wanted to give Lexi a little bit more of the floor. We told a little bits and pieces of your story, but not really the full thing. And I wanted to give you the option to share that if you'd like.
Sure, I would
Lexi.
love to. It's taken.
Sorry.
Oh no, it's okay.
I think we're like, it's like that first episode, like dress rehearsal where it's like, wait, did we ask Mandee if we're allowed to swear?
Oh, I broke up a little on my side and I didn't hear that. And this is for our listeners, for our callers, for us. It's Heart Over Ego Radio, and you can use whatever language you'd like at any time. Swear away, sister.
I can best express myself with swear words at times. So.
Me fucking too.
They're sentence enhancers.
Yes, just wanted to get that, make that clear. Okay.
You speak your language and your truth on this network.
Oh, yes. Beautiful. That's
so with that said, Lexi, raw and real, sister, it's all yours.
Oh, gosh. It's taken me years to be able to actually share this story without physically reliving like that, the pain. I was young. I got out of high school, graduated high school, went to Florida, from Vermont to Florida. Big change, huge change, and had the freedom and met this very good-looking, very talented, hot little surfer guy. And it was all, wonderful. And then his darker side came out due to drug abuse and alcohol. And it did not take long for that side to come out, and it was scary. And it was literally like a flip of a switch. Now, this is a person who also endured a lot of trauma. He lost his brother that he was really close to at a young age. So he had a lot of trauma. And me being the type of person that I am, I always want to bring out the best and give people the chance and, see the good in somebody. And it put me in a really, really bad situation. The abuse, as soon as it started, it didn't stop, and it just intensified. I wasn't allowed to go to work. We had to work at the same place, or he'd sit outside in the car and wait for me for my shift to be done. Wasn't allowed to talk on the phone. It was a very, very controlling situation. And there was, mental abuse. And there's so many different levels of abuse, and you don't realize about it. You only think of, physical abuse usually. And, with physical abuse, you have that the physical, the physical proof of it, which works good, but it's sad that it's harder to prove mental abuse and verbal abuse.
Absolutely, and recognize it as it's happening.
Exactly, and have it documented for proof. It is so hard to go through the system with those, and as something that can work, to get protection against. So I was really lucky. I, endured some horrible incidents with him. It was a daily basis, and I wish I could contact this girl because she was one of my lifesavers. There's 2 friends of his that really played a role in helping me get out safely, and that, would call the cops. This one girl, I remember her, he was on top of me saying, don't you say anything. Don't scream, don't move. And she's insisting. She's like, I know they're in there. Just break the door down. They're in there. Help her. And thankfully for her being persistent and then my other friend helping, I was able to get out. And it was one of those situations where I had a friend call that knew just what to say. Because obviously he was right there. And I was, knew to be at the airport at this time. And, he just destroyed everything. I lost so many of my belongings. My car he destroyed. There were fist marks in it. There was broken windows. It was just one of those situations that was just, a nightmare. And I was so embarrassed. I didn't want to tell anybody, because all I didn't want to hear was, I told you so. And so I felt super, super alone in it. And it was really hard to navigate for help or support, There wasn't, I didn't get to see any numbers like call this number and when I did try to reach out for it, it was always kind of a fail. There was very limited support follow through down there. And I was in Florida, Southern Florida. So, but I'm so thankful that I made it out of it, and that now through my healing journey, part of it is I just want to help others and share my story because I know how horrible it feels. You don't think you're going to get out of it when you're in it, and you don't know how to get out of it. And they put you they back you into a corner where they beat you down mentally, physically, verbally, that you literally start to believe that there's no way out. And I know of a person who, commits suicide in that relationship. And it's so sad because, her family was reading her journals after, and it was like all she wanted to do was get out of an abusive relationship. And she thought that was her only way.
Mm. And like, Lex, you were so young. Like,
yes.
You were like a baby. I mean, you were just an adult. Weren't you like 19?
Barely an adult, 18 into my 19th year, yeah.
And, I've known you since you were little. You've always been such a
I'm so grateful you got out too. And that's what happened. It was like a little bit of divine interference. You said you had a friend that just showed up and told you to go to the airport.
Yeah, well, he called. It was my neighbor, our neighbor at the time. And my dad had called, or mom had called and put this guy on, our neighbor on, and he was like, Lexi, are you in a bad situation? Say that, prompted me, gave me things so it didn't sound anything. And all I knew was to be at the airport on this date. So that date comes, and I'll never forget it. And I had a beautiful apartment. I had tons of stuff. I had, rooms filled with stuff, and I had clothing from Vermont. And I went home, things I had in my car and on my back, no windows. So the day came, and his best friend, thank God, took him and was like, no, let's go, I need you, and gave me a hug and said to me when he was giving me a hug, go, don't look back, just go. And I love you, just go, please, go. And he was so sweet, and he slipped me $20, and I got in my car, and I drove off. And I had no cell phone. I had nothing. So I didn't know who was going to be at the airport. I didn't know what time. I was shaking. I got there. I went up, found a security guard, and I was like, can you stand with me? Like, and he was super nice. And I was like, oh, of course. And I saw my dad, of all people. I was happy, but I was also like, oh, shit. You know what I mean? Like, I left for Florida on bad terms with him because I was, 18 years old, young and dumb. And I just didn't want that. I told you so. My dad came to Florida in the middle of July with steel-toe work boots, jeans, and a flannel shirt and nothing else. I literally thought he was going to have to kill this guy and go to jail to get me out of this relationship.
I was just going to say, like, I remember you telling us that your dad was, like, showing up in his, like, steel-toed boots. Like, every dad in Vermont has a pair of those.
And if you know the Vermont father or figure, the Vermont male figure, you know, like you're stereotypical. Then picture that walking out of the West Palm Beach, you know, International Airport, where you have, you know, like one of the wealthiest zip codes.
Like, I'm going to fuck some shit up
and
today.
He didn't know, neither of us knew you know what I mean? This was such a blind situation. He didn't know what he was coming down into. He didn't know was he going to be there with me or what. And here is a protective father ready to just kill this guy. And what we did, as soon as he got off, he said, let's go. You know, all I cared about was making it across that Florida border, putting miles in between us, because I was so afraid of what this kid was going to do when he found out. And it was one of those situations where, and here's one of the other funny things, you know, we had to stop and buy clothing for both of us and buy supplies. The first night at the hotel, I went to beauty school down there. I took a shower. And when he saw the makeup, you know, off and saw the bruises and what I looked like under the facade, oh man, he was ready. I had to like calm him down. He was ready to go back. That was it. You know, I'm going back. This kid isn't living. My dad's, you know, anger was so full of rage. And I mean, it was bad. I had to heal. Like, I didn't go out in public for weeks because of how I looked. And I just barely stopped being jumpy, you know, and it's been how many years?
Right. So, yeah, it's a trauma. It doesn't leave you.
No. And, you know, like talking about triggers afterwards in the healing process, like after you get out of this type of relationship or this type of situation, you know, there was a time where my husband now, who is wonderful, and, you know, there is happiness out there. There are good situations. Don't let your experience hold you back from finding something good. You know, we went to the movies, and the character in the movie reminded me so much. It sent me into a full-blown panic attack, and I had to get out. I couldn't get out of that movie theater fast enough. I was the Wile E. Coyote, you know, freaking the Trail of Dust. I was out. Still to this day, I can't watch this one movie.
I have a hard time watching movies or TV shows about domestic violence still to this day. Like, it triggers me.
Yeah.
Me too.
For sure.
I just never understood it as a child. Like, I'm like, how the fuck is this entertaining? Like, I don't get it. Like, this is real. Like, this isn't fun. This isn't cool. Like, my grandparents I always like was with them as a little kid, and they always had TV on, and it was always like women being beat and Indians being murdered. And I hated it. And still to this day, like, you know, I'm a very spiritual person, as our Heart Over Ego listeners know here. But I used to get a lot of like past life flashbacks too. That's another part of trauma and abuse, that even if you haven't experienced it as in depth in this lifetime, you may have in another lifetime. And sometimes when you're a young kid and you see that stuff, it'll give you a flashback and it'll re-traumatize you. Now, I do want to say there is a lot of hope, and there is a lot of ways to heal and change our actions and our reactions. So as much on this podcast as we are going to talk about the dark stuff and the hard parts of it, we are going to talk about the light and how you can come out of it. But unfortunately, we got to shine some lights on the shadows to do that. Lexi, something you shared with Vanessa and I in one of our talks was about how it was so nice, you know, to find. And then you talked about, you know, just now with us taking the shower, you shared with us what it was like driving in your car home. And I was wondering if you would be willing to share that now, because I think it's pretty important.
Oh, definitely. So we had to drive from Florida to Vermont. And honestly, it ended up being this beautiful journey for my dad and I. It was healing for the two of us, and it was gorgeous because I had left home on bad terms. I went down to Florida, rode down with my grandfather on bad terms with my mom and dad, and I didn't talk to them for a really, really long time. I don't even think I talked to them until like the last couple of months that I was down there, and I was down there for a year. And the ride home, we had no windows. The car was just so beat up, and every time you looked at the dashboard, you saw his fist prints. You saw like a gouge out of the steering wheel from him. There was like getting into the car, on the hood of the car, fist prints. So it was one of those things where with each mile between us, I started to feel that weight lift. and that just, you know, that awe. It was very emotional for me. Very, very emotional. And you're embarrassing too, because I was like, what's the next step? You know, like what next? How do I move? You kind of feel stunned. Like,
yeah,
you know, nothing feels the same anymore. You feel so traumatized. I felt so embarrassed. I was more ashamed and embarrassed of what I went through. And like, why am I, you know, it's, that was one of the big things. I didn't want to share it with anybody. I really didn't.
Well, something else is things and how the healing journey happened. Something I want to give a shout out to. Didn't he write "whore" on the side of your car?
Oh yeah, yep.
What did he write it in?
He keyed my car.
He keyed "whore" on the side of your car.
Oh yeah. So one of the times that I had the restraining order and I ended up, you know, they helped separate us. He came after me and found where they parked my car and just trashed it. And you want to know the worst thing ever? I got home and I had to still drive that car for like how many months until I paid it off and could get rid of it. It was so awful. I was like, I just want to get rid of this thing so bad. Like, you have no idea.
I know that we're not like, you know, obviously giving the identities of these men in our lives on this podcast, but didn't this person end up coming back to this area?
So I was able to get a phone call. If he ended up going to jail for a while, and due to the restraining order or the circumstances, I was able to get a phone call until he was off his whatever. If he left the state of Florida, because he wasn't allowed to leave the state of Florida without permission. So if he fled, they would let me notify me. And then the day that I got the phone call that I would no longer be getting that was very scary for me. And because he kept calling. I had to change my number so many times. And he kept calling, and he would always hunt me down somehow. It was so scary. He never came up here. Not that I know of.
Oh, okay. So he wasn't, for some reason I thought that he had like come up to the northeast, but maybe I'm.
His family did, and I think he did come up for a wedding at one point, but never, luckily, to the same state as me that I know of. That I know of. So thank God he's a Florida boy. I hope he stays in Florida forever. It took me a while to go back down. Like I moved to Florida out of high school. These were my family's condos. This was my mom was pregnant with me when her and her mom went down and picked out this spot in Florida. So this place in Florida was very, very special to me. My grandmother's ashes are down there. She's got a brick at the Jupiter Lighthouse, and it took me years to be able to be comfortable with going down. I was so angry that he ruined Florida for me, and I let him have too much power by giving him that. And it took me a while to learn that and to learn, like, no, he does not have to ruin that for me. I still get nervous every time I go down there, but I mean, it's getting better and better with time.
Yeah.
Time does heal. You know, there's no such thing as time, but at the same time, it does heal. And thank you for sharing that, Lexi.
Thank
you. The reason I asked you to go a little further, and especially, you know, with having the horror on the side of your car, is because it's crazy how to judge and label people. And you had told Vanessa and I that, like, you, like, saw people laughing at you, you know, when you were driving that car and stuff, and you're just trying to, like, start over, and, like, it's terrible. And we have a sister movement here on Heart Over Ego Radio called Horror Magic, which is all about, you know, changing the meaning of that word and using it to empower ourselves. And there's a whole group there called the Warriors, and it's much more about empowering your sexual side. Yeah, and healing that, because ultimately, you know, our sexuality is beautiful, and it's very much a lot that goes into it, and there's a reason why the higher that be, you know, put a lot of guilt and shame and that stigma around our sexuality. And the word whore is a classic example of that, and something we on the network and our fearless leader Jenny McDaniel is trying to help flip and change and take over. So I appreciate you sharing that, Lexi, because it's significant.
Thank you so much. It feels good to finally share it. I, didn't share for many, many years, and it makes a difference. It makes a difference to be able to share to supportive people and, release those memories and release the power they hold over me or held. They don't hold any power now.
Yeah.
Vanessa, you had some things that you wanted to maybe chat about during our...
I do. I have some things.
You want to go over some of that?
Sure. So, it's Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And I've been reading articles about, as we all have, seeing the news and everything that COVID has been doing to every facet of our lives. But felony domestic violence assault, sometimes it's called battery, depending on what state you're in, has been increasing in intensity, but not in the number of cases, like across the U.S., which makes a lot of sense because, people are home more and the, abusers have more of an opportunity to escalate violence. So that's, legit happening in every state. And I read 1,000 articles, I feel like different instances, and just it feels like every police department in America is talking about this.
A girl got murdered on my street a month ago.
I know. One of your neighbors who you said you would walk your dog by her house, right? Your dogs?
Well, so I live on this quiet little island in New Jersey, and the house I grew up in, there had been a lot of domestic violence in that house growing up. And so I've noticed that street, there's been a lot of turnover, but there's some people who've been there forever, and it's really quiet, and everyone keeps to themselves. And it's not the type of street where you walk down and everybody says hello. It's the type of street where you walk down and nobody's out in the front, and it's really weird if you wave to someone. And so I've been trying to work on that a little bit more and more, just being myself and walking around my dogs around the island. And this young couple moved in across the street and 3 houses up, and they painted their house this beautiful aqua blue kind of color and very beachy and fun. And I'm wow. And I noticed they were younger and they had a dog, and I'm maybe there's somebody on the street my age, sweet, And so I would always walk by there, just my normal routine. And I'd always kind of try to smile or wave or say hello, but I only caught a glimpse of them a couple times. And the one time, the woman was in the front, and then she kind of saw us and went to the back as we were walking. So I'm okay, if I'm meant to be friends, I'm meant to be friends with someone, it'll happen. And so I was coming home from a friend's house late one night, and my entire street was covered in police officers, but none of their lights were on, and they were all dressed in black, and there were vans everywhere, and I didn't know what was going on. And so the next morning we got up, and everybody did come out and take a look, and there was caution tape around the whole house. And it turns out that this woman and her husband, I guess there had been other domestic violence altercations, but got into an altercation, and he murdered her with a hammer and drug her through the house and everything. And she passed away, and he got arrested. I don't know if he called 911. I don't know what happened there. There isn't a lot of clarity about that yet, but he's been in jail ever since. And so it's just so crazy. And when I think about it and the things I do know about this stuff on my street, there's me, who's an advocate for all of these things, 3. I wish I knew, or I wish I could have helped, or that whole how do you intervene? But in these sorts of situations, you just have to trust in divine timing. And if I was meant to know or help, I would have, and I trust very much in that. But there's a fire chief that lives across the street, and directly across from her is a retired police officer. So it's just so crazy how sometimes you can be so surrounded by help, but all of these things happen anyway, because we have so many holes in our community where we don't even notice things sometimes.
Yeah.
It's so true. And that's one thing I want to at some point be able to really have a discussion on as bystanders, as somebody on the outside ever seeing it. What can we do? What is the role? How can you help? what's the right thing to do? Just that whole topic.
Right. So far, the best answer I can come up with is talking about it. There is a certain way. You want to respect people's boundaries. And I've been in bad relationships where maybe they're not like the most abusive. Like I've definitely been in very abusive relationships, and I've been in relationships that, aren't serving me as much as I've been like coming out of the abusive ones, better than the last. But at the same time, I know, and especially in the work that I do and in my own experiences, nobody wants to change or get help until they're ready to, until they want to. And I feel very much like the best way to help people want to be ready to do that is to take away the fear and the shame and the stigma and the guilt. Because there's so many times I would have left or I would have done things differently if I wasn't concerned about what I thought everybody else was thinking of me. And I let that lead for sure, way more than what was best for me at the time.
Yeah. It's humiliating to admit that, like, the person in your life who's supposed to be protecting you above any other person is not only not taking care of you, but is, like, abusing you and making your life miserable and ruining your life. It's a really shameful situation for, the shame you feel.
It is.
Absolutely.
It is. And I feel like that's a big preventative for people.
Yeah, if you're not afraid to say, hey, I'm in this relationship and this happened and it didn't make me feel good, or I don't quite know what's happening. Gaslighting is huge. A lot of people have experienced that and have no idea how to break down the effects after that or what that looked like. And the more we can just kind of share our stories, talk about what happened, and offer forgiveness for ourselves too, because that's a big part of releasing this shame, then we're going to start moving and alchemizing this energy and helping to release some of this. Fear, guilt, and shame are some of the lowest feeling vibrations and frequencies that can be held here in this dimension. And so the more we can bring light to that and let people know, hey, we make mistakes as we learn, we grow, we show up, we try, we love the way we were taught how to love. Sometimes we have to unlearn the way we were taught how to love and make changes. But the more we can choose love over fear and start bringing a
Lex, are you there?
I'm there.
Mandee's not here. She cut out.
Mandee.
Mandee's been cutting out pretty much
speaking the truth on all sides. And did we break up?
Well, you've been cutting out like this whole episode every like clockwork, every 3 minutes for like 5 seconds or maybe less. But you just cut out for like a little bit.
That was the longest cutout.
That was the longest. And we were like, where's Mandee?
Well, shit. Well, you sisters, take it away. I don't know. I was just going on a rant basically.
No, it was
about
a good rant. It was a good rant.
We need you.
Want to hear it.
Is this like probably like is it like an internet issue?
Could be. I'm all the way up in Vermont on like the Canadian border, actually, like 4 miles from the border.
Yeah.
So who the hell knows? But either way, I'm sorry to all of our listeners for cutting out. But
it's okay. Internet is not a thing that like Vermonters just have at their fingertips.
Poor Vanessa, you, the two of you I know have been going through it with homeschooling.
I have been in altercations with the local internet company verbally. I have sent text messages that I am ashamed of at midnight. When I was somehow able to get a manager's cell phone, I woke him up. He was like, I have children.
That's right. I think I even, as your friend, called you a little bit of a psycho the next morning.
You know what? And like, that's okay because it, but I'm like, what? Come on.
We were supposed to in Vermont be able to get, if you had kids going on when COVID hit, we were supposed to be getting a discount and being made sure that we were a priority for internet connection. And that has not been the case. And I am fighting with a company right now so hard. And we have not had internet. I never got to watch Carol Baskins. So I'm kind of irritated. It's so more ways than one.
That's my favorite.
You didn't get to watch Tiger King.
So it's awful. It's horrible.
Yeah. I mean, This is a majestic place to live, but
in this day and age, internet's a priority, and it's very difficult when it's a challenge.
So, as we continue this Seen and Heard podcast from Vermont, just hang in there with us, okay?
Yeah, we're really sorry.
Cut us some slack.
Cool. Well, ladies, we've got about 4 minutes left of this episode. Vanessa, was there anything else on your list that seemed potent that we might want to share today?
There were some things, but I think we'll save them for the next time we talk. But I did just want to touch on the National Domestic Violence Hotline. It's thehotline.org. They are an amazing resource if you're going through anything, if you need to get out of a situation, or you're thinking about getting out of a situation. And when you go to their website, they have an option where you can really quickly get out. You can be redirected back to Google. So if your abuser is like, you know, in your business all the time, or comes home unexpectedly, or just like never lets you be on the computer unless you're doing things that, you know, are pre-approved, exactly. It's really cool. And
I love that. That's such a great thing to have.
It is.
Because that's a big thing. You don't want to get caught. When you're in that situation,
right,
you're like so afraid to get caught of trying to get help. It makes it very difficult.
Yeah. So if you go to the website, you can twice on escape to get out of the website, or you can click this really cool red X button they have. But they have a chat function. They have their number right there. And they are an amazing resource. And I kind of wish I had known about them, or, I mean, I didn't do much Googling back in my situation, but
I was going to say, me too.
Yeah.
But I didn't have computer access.
Thehotline.org.
Great info.
Yeah. Have we
Beautiful.
There you are. Okay.
I'm here. Oh, I'm just listening. I just figured I'd hit mute since I was going in and out. I want to thank our listeners. I want to thank both of you for tuning in here to Heart Over Ego Radio. Please give us a like and a follow. Seen and Heard has their own Facebook page now. It's called Seen and Heard, a podcast about abuse. And we have Heart Over Ego Radio. You can find us, like us, and subscribe to us on all major podcast apps and YouTube. Lexi, do you have any closing remarks today for our show?
Just thank you so much for all holding the space with us, and for you ladies for holding the space with me.
We're honored to. What about you, Ness? Any closing remarks today?
Let's keep the conversation going, and it's so important, and let's make a difference.
Yeah.
All of our love, light, and gratitude. Thanks, listeners. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.
You are listening to Heart Over Ego Radio, a network of shows offering healing and guidance for your beautiful journey. Tune in on Mondays for the Alchemy Sisters, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 Eastern. Tuesdays, tune in and tune up. Body awareness and self-care, 11 Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. Wednesdays, One for All is Love, 1:30 Pacific, 4:30 p.m. Eastern. Thursdays, Unbound with Cynthia Martin, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 Eastern. Fridays, The Witching Hour with Greenwich Village and the Alchemy Sisters, 11 Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. And on Fridays, Rain Radio, 10 Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. Saturdays, Creating Heaven on Earth, 11 Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. And Sundays, Everyday Psychic Radio at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. This is the Heart Over Ego Radio Network.